Is it possible that Lewis Hamilton already regrets signing for Ferrari? What harsh words have you had against Vasseur and the team after the disaster in Qatar? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. The 2025 Qatar Grand Prix was not just another race on the Formula One calendar. For Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari, it represented the exact moment when promises were broken and patience reached its limit. There were expectations, there was excitement, there was narrative. The seven-time world champion arrived in Maranello as the star signing, as the symbol of the rebirth of the Scuderia, as the driver capable of returning glory to an institution wounded by years of strategic, technical, and human disappointments. But in Lusail, all that collapsed brutally. Since free practice, a tense atmosphere was already palpable in the Ferrari box. The engineers seemed disconnected without a clear direction, and the radio conversations were more interrogative than affirmative. Hamilton couldn't find the balance of the SF25, and every change made to the setup seemed to push the car further into the abyss. The problem was not just one, it was the accumulation of errors. Lack of rear downforce, violent rebound in fast corners, unstable balance between axles, and a constant feeling of unpredictability behind the wheel. Added to this was physical exhaustion, high temperatures, and a particularly demanding route on the tires. Qatar, in short, was the perfect setting to expose the shame of a poorly executed project. The classification was the first emotional blow. Hamilton was left out in Q1, in 18th position, visibly frustrated with no answers. That close-up shot of his helmet, slowly lowering the visor after getting out of the car, said more than 1,000 words. There was no visible anger, no shouting. There was resignation. Body language that seemed to scream, "This is not what I was promised." And if qualifying was a blow, the race was a collapse. There were no miracles in the sprint. Lewis tried to move forward, but the SF25 simply had no rhythm. He finished outside the top 10, disconnected from a competitive group, forced to fight against cars from the middle of the grid. In the main race on Sunday, the situation was even more depressing. The Briton was barely able to progress a few positions, constantly fighting with a car that behaved like a wild bull without stability under braking or traction when exiting corners. He finished in 12th position, out of the points, out of the debate, out of everything. Charles Leclerc, his teammate, didn't have a stellar weekend either, but he at least managed to salvage a couple points with an 8th place finish. However, his frustration was also exposed when he publicly criticized the setup decisions made by the team, calling them stupid and accusing the car of being inherently unbalanced. The fact that both pilots, two strong, competitive, experienced figures, agreed in their negative diagnosis speaks of a deep, structural problem in the SF25, not a specific issue. But the true seriousness of the situation is understood when the technical decision that Ferrari made months before is contextualized. In April 2025, the Scuderia decided to freeze the aerodynamic development of the car to focus resources on the new 2026 regulations. What on paper seemed like an early strategic move, in practice translated into abandonment. While other teams like McLaren or Mercedes continued to evolve their cars race by race, Ferrari remained frozen in time. In a sport where milliseconds separate glory from ridicule, that decision left Hamilton completely exposed in the final stretch of the championship, and that is where Hamilton's pain becomes something more than sports. It is a symbolic pain. He came to Ferrari to build, to win, to write the last glorious chapter of his career. On the other hand, in Qatar, he experienced the worst weekend in many years, perhaps the most frustrating of his entire career in Formula One. It was not just the defeat. It was the feeling of helplessness, of abandonment, of being trapped in a project that does not seem to understand the urgency of the present. All this occurs in a context where the spotlights are more on than ever. The Italian press, the Ferrari fans, the experts, and even the sponsors observe every movement with a magnifying glass. And in the middle of that storm, Lewis Hamilton stopped remaining silent. Because there are times when even champions must speak clearly. And Qatar was that moment. A warning sign that still resonates in Maranello. Formula One races are not only held on the track. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in offices, in statements, in cold glances within the paddock. And in Qatar, after the disaster, Lewis Hamilton decided to stop holding his tongue. The message was clear, direct, with a first and last name, Frédéric Vasseur. To understand the magnitude of what happened, you have to remember who Hamilton is. Not just a driver with 7 world titles, but someone who has experienced all the faces of Formula One. The glory, the frustration, the internal politics, the winning cycles, and the teams in crisis. And if there is one thing he learned during his time at Mercedes, it is that no driver, no matter how talented, can build a winning team alone. Leadership, technical direction, strategic vision are needed. Elements that, according to his words and attitudes in Qatar, he does not see in Ferrari today. Sources close to the team leaked what was cooking behind closed doors after the race. Hamilton, in an internal post-GP analysis meeting, was blunt with his criticism. He spoke not as a frustrated pilot, but as a disappointed leader. He strongly pointed out the frozen development decisions, the car's lack of adaptability, the lack of reaction to persistent problems, and especially, the way race weekends are handled. He said literally that the team is not up to the level required to compete for championships. It was not a spontaneous comment, it was a measured shot with intention. Vasseur, at the helm of Ferrari since 2023, was at the time applauded for his apparent organizational firmness. But that initial speech begins to wear out. The key decisions he has made this season, such as slowing development of the SF25 to focus on 2026 or maintaining a technical team that continues to make the same mistakes as previous years, are now seen as acts of complacency rather than transformative leadership. The Italian media environment, always voracious, was responsible for amplifying the tension. Headlines like "Hamilton launches its first missile" or "The fracture in Maranello is real" began to flood the sports newspapers. Television shows and radio talk shows began to raise uncomfortable questions. Is Vasseur qualified to direct a driver like Hamilton? Is there a clash of visions between the Britain's methodical approach and Ferrari's historical volatility? Can a team function when its technical leader and its sports leader speak different languages? Because that is exactly what is happening. Hamilton isn't just asking for a competitive car. It is demanding a modern, precise, reactive structure. At Mercedes, he was an active part of the development, working closely with the engineers, and his feedback was implemented quickly. At Ferrari, as can be seen from their statements, their suggestions seem to be diluted between departments without a clear chain of decisions, and the most worrying thing is that this technical and emotional divorce is taking place in real time, before the eyes of the world. Every race that passes without Ferrari showing a reaction, every session where the SF25 remains unstable, will further feed the narrative that the project is failing, that the marriage between Hamilton and Ferrari is in danger of breaking up before completing its natural cycle. But Hamilton is not just a victim. He is taking control of the story. By publicly, albeit subtly, criticizing Vasseur, he is sending a message both to the team and abroad. I did my part. Now it's your turn. It is a political pressure move, classic in Formula One, which has only one objective: to force changes, to remove structures, to force responses. Because for Lewis Hamilton, this project is not simply a romantic adventure with the most iconic team in motorsport. It's his last real chance to fight for a championship again. And you're not about to waste it watching your team get bogged down in basic mistakes. There's no longer room for courtesy or diplomacy. Either Ferrari changes course, or Hamilton will stop waiting. When a Formula One project begins to fracture from within, the consequences are not only seen on the stopwatches. They are also perceived in the silences, in the decisions that are postponed, in the subtle gestures during technical meetings. And if anything was clear after the Qatar Grand Prix, is that the future of the Hamilton-Ferrari project has entered a critical zone. Dangerously critical. Lewis Hamilton's message, direct to Frédéric Vasseur and the entire Ferrari technical leadership, was not a simple complaint about a bad weekend. It was a warning. A warning from someone who has won everything, who has lived through the complete cycles of construction and destruction within an elite team, and who perfectly recognizes the symptoms of a project that is not moving forward. The British pilot, although he still measures his words publicly, no longer hides his discomfort. And that has consequences. The echo of Qatar continues to resonate, not only in the walls of the Ferrari box, but also in the minds of millions of fans who observe how one of the most media and hopeful movements of recent years begins to falter. Hamilton has made it clear, the time for nice words is over. His message was not one of immediate rupture, but it was an unequivocal warning. A reminder that even great legends have a limit, and that history is not written with eternal patience. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.